Running commentary. We are exploring listening to albums. It is a lost art form. We took an hour out of our day. We switched off the phones. We switched off the computers. We did not answer the door. We sat down and we listened to the artist's vision and concept. Boss Drum by the Shamen. We were lucky enough to encourage my brother Alex Borman from London to join us for the review of the Shamen's Boss Drum. You can actually see the other episode. Alex had asked us to review The Prodigy, Music for the Jilted Generation, and I thought it would be fun for us to review something I remember that you used to enjoy as someone even younger than the Shamen. The single Boss Drum by the Shamen was something I remembered that you really liked.
Yeah, well,
we're really going back, aren't we?
We are really going back, yeah. We're going back into sort of, these are pre-teen years for me.
Right.
You know, I think this album was 92, was it?
Mm-hmm.
92, so I'd been 11 when this album first came out. It was just something very different, you know, from the sort of music that I'd been around when I was growing up, that I was raised on at this point. Just had a very, very different sort of distinctive sound. It was probably one of the first examples of sort of techno music that, especially in the mainstream, that I'd ever heard of.
Let's talk a little bit about the Shamen. They were formed in 1986 in Aberdeen, making them a Scottish band, which I didn't know. The founding members are Colin Angus, Derek McKenzie, Keith McKenzie. Peter Stevenson took over the keys from Angus shortly after. Colin Angus later teamed up with Will Sinnott, who took the band to international success, but here's a really bittersweet angle here. Will Sinnott was died during the making of the Move Any Mountain video. I believe that was filmed in Tenerife, did we say?
Yes,
so, tragic loss there, as you know, to get your band to that level and then to lose a member.
Definitely.
Mr. C was born Richard West, which I'm sure Trevor, our cousin, will really like that, because that's also his family name. Richard West was born in Holloway in London. And at only 16, he was emceeing in London's clubs. He was working with LWR Radio's Ron Tom, Jasper the Vinyl Junkie, and Jazzy M. Mr. C then joined forces with Colin Favor and Evil Eddie Richards to secure a resident rapping spot at Camden Palace. He then would MC for Colin Favor on the then illegal Kiss FM. Mr. C went on to DJ at Fantasy, bass at Dungeons, Release, and so on and so forth. So this character, Mr. C, was this big, charismatic person that joined the Shamen in 1990 and brought with him, I guess, a huge following just from his sort of club presence, which I think you really have to take into account to what really made the Shamen surge forward in this burst in 92, and to be frank with you, 92 was really their one and only big year, but what a year it was. My feelings about Boss Drum, the single, apart from obviously connecting it with my brother who used to sing along to this relentlessly, number 4 single at the end of 1992, back within the rhythm that has always been within you, back within the rhythm, very hypnotic. Almost, and now when you start to understand, and we'll talk about this album, it had a sort of hypnotic kind of sensibility which tied into what the band's fundamental message was. I'm going to keep bringing up Trevor here because this was a band that he really had a close connection with. And almost for the first time I'm hearing possibly how these strong connections and feelings came about, because this music actually seems to have an undercurrent of something far more cerebrally, significant than anyone, I think, in probably pop culture initially gave it credit for.
Definitely. I mean, as you said, bringing someone like Mr. C into the fold within the Shamen at that point, that was very relevant because of the fact that he had a huge following in essentially what was a very underground, you know, that sort of thing that Mr. C was on. As you mentioned, Kiss back then was illegal, which is now obviously one of the mainstream sort of radio stations in London, if not the UK now. But the fact that a vast majority of the sort of circles that he would have moved in, that he would have performed in, were predominantly very much an underground scene, which was very much away from the mainstream. And him sort of, getting in with the show, becoming part of the Shamen, pretty much would have brought a very large contingent of that underground sort of people along with him, which I think was one of the reasons for the success of the album.
Boss Drum was released on the One Little Indian label, which I believe Bjork had been on momentarily as well. Either Bjork or she'd been part of the Sugar Cubes, but it was also her label for a while. In the September of 1992, it reached number 3 on the UK album charts and was certified platinum. The singles enjoyed some success in Europe, one of those singles being Ebeneezer Goode, which is a number 1 in both England and Ireland. Definitely a memorable number 1 in 1992, just because of the controversial nature of, I guess, the band were being clever in a sort of syllabic fashion, but I guess they didn't think anyone would be watching, or maybe they did. It's hard to know really how they thought that they would get away with a song which basically goes, "Ease are good, ease are good, he's Ebeneezer Goode," which was the title of the song, with these kind of people just like mugging it, very like looking kind of shady and trashy in the video. Big number 1 song though, but from what I can gather, the British press thought that they were responsible for getting rid of it. Other bands say that, the band themselves say, that what happened was this was deleted from availability when it was a number 1 back in, I think, August of 1992. What do I think about this song? I think it just ties in so centrally to rave culture. You can't take one away from the other, right? I don't think there's any way around the fact that in the UK at this time, this is what young men and women were doing. They were going to raves. There's no way around it. And this song was kind of funny. Now, got any salmon or Vera and all of this stuff? Talk us through some of those catchphrases. What was this song?
It's Cockney rhyming slang, really. A vast majority of it. Things like Vera's is short for Vera Lynn's. Vera Lynn's are referred to. It's almost like a double. It's basically like a double rhyming slang, really. Vera Lynn, skin. Skin is another word for a rolling paper. So basically, it was as well as the Ease are Good, which is obviously, talking about ecstasy and things like that. A lot of the things was that. But that's to do with cannabis smoking. Definitely. That sort of thing. Got any Veras? Salmon is, again, Cockney rhyming slang. Salmon, trout, snout. Snout is another word for cigarette. So that's pretty much where that came from.
What do you think about the song, though?
I like the song. I really did. Obviously, again, at the age of 11, I didn't understand the context that the record was in. It's only then, when you got a little older and actually understood what it meant, it actually made it hilarious for me. It really did. The fact that they managed to actually get, be able to get that record to where it was, to make it number 1 in the UK, before anybody actually realised what it was about. I think that's excellent. That's really a way to do a number. That's a great way to do a number on.
That was almost like the peak of that kind of rave thing. Obviously the Prodigy, like we said, took it underground. They said in the intro that they were taking it underground. There was a feeling probably after Ebeneezer Goode and everything that went with it, that sort of rave record for me started to go more to a sort of a club kind of sensibility. It started to become people like Two Unlimited and Capella, and because the Shamen were mainstream, really, weren't they? They were.
This album was literally the only example of the Shamen's music that I'd ever heard of. But yeah, very much, even as far back as these years in the early 90s, that was the whole rave scene, warehouses and things like that, disused buildings, what are more commonly today referred to as squat raves, really, where people would pretty much just take over an abandoned site and just turn it into a party that would basically go on for as long as it possibly could until it was broken up by the authorities, really. It's a scene that had always been there. But this was sort of for the first time, certainly in my knowledge anyway, that it was really brought to the surface and actually presented within the mainstream.
Forever People is our next song. Number 5 single on the UK charts. It was a number 1 on the Billboard Hot Dance Club playlist. This doesn't resonate with me quite so much. I think some of I believe it's Victoria Wilson-James on background vocals. She's a big-time background singer at this time. She did background for Pet Shop Boys Go West, background for Soul to Soul, A Dream's a Dream. It's just, I seem to remember it being more tuneful at the time. At the time hearing it, I don't remember feeling like it was slightly off-key Whereas when I listen to it now, I guess because we've all the divas we've been exposed to, and so on and so forth, it's one of those songs that when I listen back to it seemed better at the time than it does when I'm listening to it now. Not against the song. I prefer Boss Drum as a single.
I do like it vocally. Possibly not the strongest piece of work ever. I mean, I wouldn't say it's bad. I wouldn't. At the same time, it's got a very throughout the album. There's quite the techno beat. Obviously, is what drives this album, like musically, and much as with other artists, they sort of almost develop their own sort of sound and riff that actually went with it, and it's a very much a representation of like quite similar sort of stuff to what goes on within the album. It's just the fact that it's a lot more vocal. It's a lot more. It's almost. I would almost go as far to say that compared to some of the other sort of tracks on the album, it's almost a bit more commercial.
Coming on, we should say here at this point that we're not reviewing the album in order that it appears on the album. We're actually picking the tracks and talking about those just because of the way it's presented online for listening. Coming On is the next song, which was part of the SOS EP in 1993. It reminds me of a sort of a second-rate Easy Posse. That girl can actually really do the whole ragga thing effectively. This just comes across as very diluted. At times it actually sounds like a chicken in a farmyard. It's very like a very strange sound, as though this chicken is sort of pecking at the... I don't get it. And it's that sort of dodgy undercurrent of people. It's the underbelly. It's the side you don't want to see. And I understand that, on Soft Cell, it's the side you don't want to see. Actually, I'm kind of interested in seeing that side, but this is the side I really don't want to see. I really don't want to meet these people. Like, they're really... I just imagine them being, like, really grungy and just, like... I don't know, it's like the sort of judgment-y part. It's those kind of, like, drug addicts you don't want to meet. I don't know, there's something about this song that just takes me to, like, sort of really just the bottom of the barrel with this band. And they're very evolved in some areas, and it's like, this is not in keeping with that sort of evolution that some of their other material has. It's not sophisticated, to my mind.
I really can't offer it much support, to be honest. It's really not a great tune. It's really not for me. Even for someone that that has been and is into sort of like the rave culture, the rave music, etc., I'm afraid I can't even refute anything that you're saying there.
Next up, we have Re-Evolution, which was a number 18 single in 1993. Very powerful oratory here, featuring Terence McKenna, and it really is. This is when you start to wonder if the band were recruiting almost for a I won't say a cult, because I think that's a little harsh, but to talk about what the Shamen are, which are, essentially a people who use, as the song says, practices or techniques using psychedelic plants to break down boundaries and stepping outside the bounds of learned culture. There's a great deal of power to what the man is saying here, especially as a more mature person who's interested in sort of metaphysical revolution. The methods he goes about achieving that, are his own business, I would say, and probably is. But this really is far and away, it detaches itself from the rest of the album. The music's happening, but his incessant American voice, he sounds as though he's, I don't know, maybe from our producer's neck of the woods, maybe from Boulder in Colorado or somewhere like that. He really sounds as though he's just, he doesn't sound like he's had many days without the psychedelics. He actually sounds completely on a different level. And I don't know, this is an incredible piece of oratory work. There's no way around it. There's no way that I can put down what is being said. But I do question its placement on what was essentially a pop album. And I like the song and I'm going to buy it. I like the strings here. It's out of place for me on this album, but I do think it's a very good song. So it's very strange because of the speaking, not because the music's anything special. I like the strings in juxtaposition with what's being said, because he does actually, because of the way it's delivered and the way the music is happening behind it, sort of puts you in a trance with this person sort of hypnotizing you with words to do with what his belief systems are, you know. Trance is not even, doesn't even describe it. I was like going into the Holland Tunnel yesterday with that building up on wherever it was, Troy, with these like horrible, like, it's just, wow. That was a trip. I mean, and I really, again, no one took anything. I was on a bus coming home from Woodbury Common listening to this one, and I felt like I was on a trip listening to this guy.
Re-Evolutions does absolutely nothing for me. I'm not going to lie. The whole... I'm just really not into the whole spiritualism sort of thing that's trying to be portrayed here. This, for me, musically, it's not really about that for me. It's musically, there's nothing really there for me that interests me in any way, shape, or form. It's almost like something that should have been at the front of the album in case you didn't know what a shaman was. It might as well have just been that, really, just like setting a bit of a backstory of what's actually, you know, what the album's about. They chose to put it on the back end, which obviously is equally acceptable, I suppose.
Another song here we have from the album, Libre Solidi Denari, which is this sort of Latin kind of reference. You know, there's a lot of educational references here, aren't there? There's a sort of, I don't know what we call that when we're sort of not going above our station, because that's not a nice way of saying things, but sort of I don't know. The title's, I don't know what that means, actually. We should probably look that up at some point, or maybe one of our audience members will. I didn't look it up. As far as the song goes, you know, it went to sort of different speeds here. It was an instrumental, and I kind of liked this one, actually. I thought this was really interesting, just as a musical piece, and it was rather nice not to be bombarded with the vocal renderings of the band on this piece. What were your feelings about it?
I'd agree primarily with what you're saying. If it's maybe the fact that this is an instrumental song maybe does this a favour to a certain extent. I like it's got a very full sort of techno beat to me as well. It does the full nine of what I expect from those sort of songs as well. It builds you up to a decent level, and then literally it just drops to a good point. And I mean, so I find this is one of the more engaging, uplifting songs, especially from like a dance perspective. Anyway, it's a decent track cover.
We have a couple of songs left to talk about. Before we do that, I just want to make a sort of a comparison here for anyone that's watching the two reviews. Mm-hmm. Now, clearly with Prodigy, we've mentioned drugs. We haven't really talked about them here directly on the Shamen. This is a couple of years before, although the Prodigy at the same time had that first album out with Charlie and Everybody in the Place, etc. How important are drugs to this album?
The whole thing is referenced around psychedelic drugs, isn't it? It's, all of that, really. If you take that away from it, if you take psychedelic drugs away from this, you're going to remove half the album. There's nothing much there. That's how much this is built around it. It doesn't really have, not that I'm aware of, it doesn't really have, like when we were comparing Music for the Jilted Generation, for me that album has a purpose. That album has a purpose with regards to, as well as being like a foundation of the culture and the music of where it's actually gone and where it's been. As well as that, it's politically important in the history as well. Whereas this, to me, doesn't have any.
What do you think
relevance.
Sorry to interrupt you. What do you think would be the difference between someone who would listen to the Shamen and someone who would listen to the Prodigy as an audience? If you had to guess the difference between what the people that would listen to this album would look like.
As in physical appearance?
Well, not necessarily physically appearance, but you can go London on us here. What do you imagine a Shamen fan is like as opposed to a Prodigy fan? Well, you're a Prodigy fan.
I am a Prodigy fan, yeah, so...
And do you find that Prodigy fans are similar to you?
I don't think there's...
A type?
No, I don't think there is. I don't think with rave music, rave culture, techno, going into sort of, the things that like and Prodigy sort of style of music as well, I don't think there is a stereotypical person in there. I really don't, which is one of the things that I always believed, that even going to sort of raves myself in the late 90s, early noughties and things like that, there really isn't a specific type of person.
Right, and some might say that with a track like Re-Evolution and the psychedelic drugs and the breaking down of boundaries, where you're suddenly finding yourself, with your arms wrapped around some random stranger in the crowd, a bottle of water in one hand and your tongue down their throat, is that the possibility of... That's my understanding of what the possibility is and why those boundaries are broken down, and this is where some might say that drugs are a useful part of this kind of music, is that it broke boundaries down in the same way that club did, but almost to a greater extent because of the openness of... I mean, I think that drugs have always been a part of dance culture, but it's just, is there a better drug? I mean, you don't think of heroin necessarily in dancing. Maybe like, I don't know, indie, like goth rock or something, like, I don't know. But I find the whole subject very interesting, and that breaking down of boundaries is largely due to the idea that if you take an ecstasy, things kind of, their beauty is changed, or this is what I'm told. This idea that taking drugs breaks down all the boundaries, and you can see the beauty in everything, and suddenly something that looks hideous, you can actually see what is attractive about it, which is, to me, what the guy on Re-Evolution is talking about. I don't know what your feelings are about that kind of...
The whole experience of it, from going to those sort of raves and things like that. And obviously, a lot of the time when you were going to these sort of places, I'm talking clubs like the Camden Palace, Bagley's, Stratford Rex, all of these sort of places. The different genres of music, even though, as I said, you couldn't pigeonhole someone and say there was a very specific type, they would have in these sort of raves, they would have very different sort of music genres in there. From one moment you'd walk in and you'd have what they refer to as sort of like old school music, which was like the very early sort of like techno sort of sounds that sort of spawned hardcore, if you will. Those sort of people were always very uplifted, really quite high spirited, like really quite sociable, nice people. Do you know what I mean? Like felt very open. It felt very welcome. It felt very accommodating. And then equally, you'd walk from that into maybe a drum and bass room.
Next track on the album we're going to talk about is Fat Man, which is sort of a bit nondescript for me. Beaty, but not really memorable. I'm kind of in and out with this album. I sort of, sometimes I'm there, sometimes I'm not. When it grabs me, it really grabs me. Sometimes a lot of it is memory stuff. But in this case, I don't really relate to the title. I don't have any feelings towards this.
I probably listened to this a bit too hard and actually tried to find some meaning in it, because the same as yourself, I found it to be fairly run-of-the-mill, maybe even slightly mundane sort of track. I was trying to see if there was any sort of relevance with the, Keep On Running. That was like a reference that kept going in there. The only thing that I could really assume from it is that, and also it's got references in there to sort of like hard work, to literally being able to sort of like build up from humble and sort of quite difficult beginnings to actually making it obviously to an elevated point there. Like probably that this could be perceived as obviously having an album that I believe you said reached number 3 in the charts. I think the Fat Man sort of represents sort of like idleness and wasting of sort of time within your life and things like that as well.
Yeah.
Not necessarily following things through. And basically, if you are, basically the whole thing that you'll keep running from, what is represented with the Fat Man, is to stay away from being idle and not actually progressing with anything in your life. Because if he does get you, then essentially what tends to happen when you are idle and you don't really have any direction, you can become that Fat Man.
Indeed. The next track is Scientas, and this is new agey. It's sort of very in that beloved, almost future sound of London, 808 State soundscapey kind of vibe for me. Instrumental, there's rainfalls and pan flutes. Put me to sleep. It was pretty hypnotic. I liked its ability to sort of like, nod you out. I found like it was a real sort of like post-lounge chill out thing. I kind of liked it. I liked the beginning of it, like the sort of high-pitched kind of twinkling piano thing or whatever it was that it had there. So definitely not against the track. Not my favourite, but it's not bad. It's better than some of the tracks on the album.
It's a chill out song. It's basically what it is. It's got the whole like a pan-pipey sound to it as well at points. It's either sort of this will only have 2 places for me. This is either sort of like a chill out lounge for sort of like an after party sort of vibe, either that or a techno equivalent of elevator music, really.
Final summation of the Boss Drum Shamen album. It was an interesting kind of review, really. I liked hearing Ebeneezer Goode again. It was funny how it took me back 25 years since that song's been a number 1. And when you put that in perspective, 25 years ago, that song was a number 1. And I had a smile on my face, and I had a good little chuckle to it. They did a good job with that. I think that was a marketing genius with that song. I liked Boss Drum because it reminds me of this guy growing up. I liked the song, and I liked its hypnotic effect. I liked actually before not knowing what it was kind of trying to lead me into, which is clearly re-evolution. Boss Drum, re-evolution, space and time. They're going hard with this ideology that's behind this album, and shamanism, and the going up state, and the communing with the spirits and things of that nature. I'm a very spiritual person. I definitely believe in the earth speaking. I believe in nature speaking. So for this reason, re-evolution is transformational. I don't know this person, Terence McKenna. I think he probably might be worth me looking a little more into, just to kind of figure out what the evolution of this guy is, and who he was at that time that he appeared on this album. But Re-Evolution was really struck me as my favorite song on the album. I know that Alex didn't like it. But overall, I think what I came away with here is that 91 going into 92, I wouldn't say it was a fallow period, but it was a time, as we've said, that there was sort of a recession going on in England. Funds were tight, and your good time was down at the Rave. This is where you'd go. You'd go down to the club, you'd hang out with your friends, you'd get off your bonds, and you'd listen to music like this. And listening to it in this day and age, in 2017, wasn't a complete waste of time. It didn't, for me, have the same purpose, I think is the right word, that you came up with here. I think it was a little bit more free-flowing. I think that there was definitely more edge and more grunge to the Prodigy's later album, but then we have to remember what the Prodigy were doing at this time, which was actually a little bit more in that sort of cartoony, kiddie kind of Rave thing, which they desperately wanted to shake off, by the way, the Prodigy. So it's very important to mention that. So in final summation of the album, from my perspective, Running Commentary Album Reviews awards the Shamen's Boss Drum 71%.
For me, this was a nostalgic trip, to be honest. This was some of my very early influences into what was considered sort of like underground music, electronic music as well, sort of techno and things like that. Listening back to it now, I do realise that maybe nostalgia is a lot more of a powerful thing than the actual quality of this album, to be honest with you. I think back then, if I'm being honest, back then I probably would have scored this quite highly. But literally for pure nostalgia only, I would probably score this at 75%.
We have a 75 and a 71, which puts us at 146. Divide that by 2, and Running Commentary's Album Reviews with Alex Borman awards the Shamen Boss Drum 73%.